Well, hello and welcome to another episode of On It, Not In It, the interview series. I am your host, Todd Eppert, and today I'm joined by Franco Kraiselburd, who is the founder and CEO of Asclepii. Franco, thank you for so much for joining us. Would you like to give a brief background as to who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Franco Kraiselburd. I'm a biomedical engineer from Case Western Reserve University. So I kind of grew up around the world and I got to witness a very severe healthcare disparity where there was a lot of people suffering from lack of access to advanced treatments. And I kind of embarked on a journey to try to create more accessible advanced treatments at a global scale. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, awesome. So that kind of gives us a little bit of maybe a little bit about your passion behind the scenes, like what led you to this. But so you are a scientist by background, obviously highly educated. Case Western, what a great reputation for a university. But not everybody that's a scientist jumps right into the business world. So what inspired you to start your own business? Was there like a spark?
Yeah, there's it's a two-part answer. I'm gonna be honest. The first thing is it's ironic. I'm very stubborn. I worked in the lab. So I'm in the business of making cellular therapy. When I say advanced therapy, I really mean cellular therapies, regenerative therapies, right? The concept of using your own cells to heal your own body. And so I actually coming to Cleveland was a big deal for me because the first cellular therapy of the world was invented here in Cleveland. Uh, Working in the lab, I actually worked in the lab of Arnold Kaplan, who created this first cell therapy. And his first rule is scientists cannot be CEOs. And the reason for that, he actually founded a company, and he founded a wound healing company too, which is very directly related to what we do. And the company eventually sold for $660 million in 2019. So he knew how to create a very valuable product. But unfortunately, there was a lot that happened in that business, and that often, it's hard to interface science with business. And so my first kind of challenge was, well, hey, can I go the extra mile, and can I be a CEO that is a scientist, right? And that was one. And then the second part is, well, I grew up, my family was always very entrepreneurial. I grew up in a family that was kind of very involved in business. And so that kind of, in a way, really just pushed me to want to create my own. I was lucky to never have barriers put on innovation for my end and for my family's perspective.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. So that gives us a little. So you had a not only did you get to work under obviously like an edge cutting or a front of the edge, the tip of the knife, whatever you want to call it, tip of the spear type of a scientist who was in the field that you wanted to pursue, but he also was an entrepreneur and then sold it for $660 million. That's a lot of money. So clearly he was obviously a good business guy, and then you had the family background as well. But it's interesting that you said that. I've heard that before. I'm an engineer by degree, and I started in a very technical field. And I remember one of my bosses sat me down one day and said, "Hey, you're either going to become a leader of people or you're going to stay in the technical world." So I'm going to stick with that theme and ask you a question. Do you ever see a chance where you may need to be more of a people person, business person as the CEO of the business and lose some of that technical skill, or do you think you will hire some folks as your business continues to grow that would lead your business and leave you the technical expertise?
I think it's an excellent question. In fact, there's always when one studies the field of entrepreneurship or business in general, I mean, there's types of people, there's types of CEOs and leaders, and I'll be very blunt in saying actually, I have a very unique perspective about this. I think so. We're currently at a moment where I actually have to focus more on the people person side of things. In fact, I very rarely go to the lab. I mean, I would say I'm actually at the lab maybe 1 to 2 days a week at best at this point. Where I used to be there every single day of the week. And then most of my days, three out of the 5 days of the week, 3 out of the 6 sometimes we work a lot, but are often with people facing roles, outward facing roles. And the reason for that is because it's really fundamentally important to keep science, to keep the technical perspective core to the business, right? I mean, we're in the business of innovation. And so it's often, and I see this a lot, it's often happens that people, right? So non-technical folks kind of start making promises or understanding a side of the business that can't be fulfilled from the technical standpoint. And so I think just the true value of the business, and by the way, what we've done with our business, which is very interesting, and I'll elaborate a little bit more on that, but it's very central to science, right? So we know the partnerships we can make, the funding that makes sense for us to get, and the kinds of people that we want to get involved with very well, because we have that technical perspective. But my role, in fact, just has been completely outward facing with people and business and development and strategy. And I'm very rarely at the lab. In fact, now I actually did kind of hire a more technical person. So what I think is, personally, I actually hire the scientists, right? I'll hire a really good scientist that can understand my technology and move it forward, but I will not maybe a non-technical person to do my job for me in terms of like outward facing. I mean, obviously, like, strategy is really important. Getting a strategy person, getting a business development person, even a sales strategy, those are all great. But the real kind of role of execution, of leading the company forward, I don't think that could be outwardly externalized, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So if I get what you're saying there is, because the outward facing person needs to have a technical background, and you want to lead the business, that makes sense for you to move forward into that role and then hire the technical expertise behind you to fill those gaps in the lab. So I think if I go back to what your professor said to you, and actually what my boss said to me, is they weren't saying you can't be a CEO if you're a scientist. What I think they're saying is you can't stay a scientist and become a CEO. Like, you can't be a technical engineer, because the longer time you're outside of that lab, the less you have in the lab, right? And those people will maybe even start to exceed your own knowledge as they continue to innovate in your space, and they may be teaching you about the things they're learning versus the other way around. Is that what you think he was getting at?
Yeah, and by the way, going back to being really stubborn, I went back. So my mentor passed away in January, but one of the last conversations we actually had was I reinvented his role. And it's exactly what you said. No, you're very on point. I said, you're right. Scientists can't be CEOs, but CEOs can be scientists. And that was one of the last conversations I had with a stem cell legend. And now it's kind of onwards to taking on this role of, hey, let's be a CEO scientist, right? And let's understand the technical standpoint while bringing forward a company to a level, to a new horizon, right? And to achieving technical and innovation levels of innovation that haven't before been seen.
So thanks for sharing all that, Franco. I think it gives us a great background on where you are today and how you got there and all the things that you've done so far. What the most interesting thing to me is that you had a professor that said scientists can't be CEOs. Well, I would tell you that any entrepreneur has an expertise, and if they stay in that expertise, they're going to limit their business in some way. They have to get outside of it, which is why our podcast is called On It, Not In It, right? So you've been working on hiring good people around you. You're just putting them in the places of the technical expert versus the leadership team or the management team. So that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. So as you've been stepping more into this leadership role, more customer out facing, you've probably been working on the business more than you've been working in the business, outside the lab versus in the lab. So tell me, what are some misconceptions that you had about working outside you've been bumping into?
I think the most straightforward one is that things are straightforward. I mean, I thought that things would make sense. I mean, that if you need a certain amount of capital for a certain milestone, it's like, oh, I'll just find someone for it very easily. I mean, I thought that milestones were kind of a straight line as opposed to a bunch of different iterations and failures until getting there. And a second really, really, really big one is just the amount of time that it really, really takes to make this happen. I always thought that, figuring out a business wasn't hard, right? I'm and obviously naively, right? But I figured, I mean, the actual business part, the creating of value the creating commercial value, which is the centerpiece of entrepreneurship, is creating value that people can pay for. That felt more straightforward. I actually thought that the hardest thing I would have to do in this business was make the technology. And I was very wrong. I actually think that innovating in how one creates value, how one builds the team, there's just so many factors happening constantly. And that's definitely the biggest lesson we've learned.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's perfect. So you mentioned time. You've also mentioned that sometimes you're 6 days a week working. So I mean, I'm not going to make any guesses, and that's not what this is about. But you're a younger entrepreneur. You're a couple of years into business. Your business is still fairly young. Have you started to think about the work-life balance thing, or right now is that not important to you, and you're just focused on getting your business running?
Oh, excellent question. I love this question. So I'm a 22-year-old.
Mhm.
And by the way, I'm very open about it. I'm a 22-year-old leading a healthcare company. I'm very young. I graduated in May. So yeah, I mean, and I've been working in scientific roles for about 8 years. So I started when I was 14 years old. That was my first job in an actual lab setting. In very relevant. I mean, I was working with translational medicine, with cellular therapies, really, but I actually didn't think about work-life balance until very recently. And I'll be honest, I mean, I was in college. I was an engineering student, staying up until 11:58 p.m. and submitting it at 11:59, right? It was, I mean, no one thought about work-life balance in my immediate surroundings until the company started growing. So we've since, I mean, we've raised a lot of money. We have about $1 million right now in non-dilutive funding. We've started a lot of partnerships, and as the company started growing, as the scale started increasing, I realized that I was getting really stressed out and really burnt out, and I couldn't understand why. Because I love this. I love the meetings that I take, right? The work that I do, so I was like, why am I, And then at a certain point, it was a conversation with friends and family where I realized, well, I'm barely spending time for myself. And that was affecting my business, right? So no, work-life balance is an immensely important thing. In fact, the reason sometimes we work 6 days a week and as opposed to more hours in a day is because we try to deliberately limit and stop ourselves from working at like 5 or 6 p.m. Beyond 6 p.m., I'm not doing anything for the company. I barely take a call after 5 if possible. And I wake up at a time that's reasonable, and I try to get good amounts of sleep. I do exercise. I mean, all these things are fundamental because another huge lesson we've learned is that you cannot work. You're not at your best. You cannot lead a company, make a good decision if you haven't eaten well, if you haven't slept well, and if you haven't taken care of yourself well. I mean, having a good living space, a good surrounding environment of people, and a good kind of ecosystem around you to support you is really, really important. And I think I'll tell you, my last 5 months, 6 months, since January really of this year, I've done a substantial effort in making that happen, in having a work-life balance. And that's actually I would tell you that's probably my number one rule is if you cannot have a life while you run a business, then you should not be running a business.
Yeah, I love that comment. You mentioned, okay, 22, so you're a Gen Z, right? I'm a Gen X. There's a Gen in between us called the Millennials, right? Whatever you want to call them, Gen Y, Millennials.
I
And
thought
it's
you
funny
were a
you say
millennial.
that. What's that?
I thought you were a millennial.
Little older than that. But it's funny you say that because my generation was, hey, we work really hard and we worry about work-life balance as we get older, just like the generation before us, the boomers, right? And then we had the millennials come along and they really flipped us out because we were like, what's happening? These people, they don't want to work. No, no, no. They just have different values than we have, right? And so you almost got trapped in that cycle of the Xer starting a business. You got, but then you got stressed and you realized, wait, something's off. I need to go back to what is really important to me. And you said something I think really, really important there from the perspective of if you're running a business and you're not also seeking life balance, you will not run an effective business. Therefore, you should not run a business, right? So it's a really obvious thing now that we look back on it. But for generations before you, we didn't understand that, right? We just grindstone and worked because that's how we got ahead in the game. And by the way, I also love that you're a 22-year-old scientist school that's business. And by the way, the business has been around almost 2 years. So you started your business while you were in college, which again is a whole nother attribute that I would put on millennials and Gen Z, even more in the Gen Z, which is really super cool. You guys just don't want to wait around, and I love it because it's going to drive innovation. It's going to drive new things in our world, in our workplace, because you're not just waiting around for things to happen. You're taking advantages of things you see in the marketplace. So I love that story, Franco. Thanks for sharing it. And I don't think anybody that listens to our podcast is going to go, wait, he's way too young to listen to this to run a business. I think we get a lot of millennials and a lot of Z's that listen to this podcast.
No, yeah, it's a great perspective, and I will also, I think you're right, but when you mention of something being obvious, right? I mean, when you're down in the weeds, it's just not obvious. Even right, even I mean, I think even independent of your generation, but specifically when you're doing something, when you're really, really, really focused on something, it's hard to zoom out. And luckily, because of recent milestones and kind of I've had the opportunity to slowly zoom out and really look at it from a different perspective, and so I agree. And by the way, I stand on the shoulders of giants with everything I do. I think that's one of the biggest value adds I bring to the table as a younger entrepreneur and business person is that I can integrate a lot of feedback and perspectives from various different walks of life. And my older mentors who've been there, done that several times. Their biggest point of advice has always been consistently just live life. It's enjoy the process. Really make sure you're actually happy while you're doing it. And so luckily, I think you're right. I mean, starting a business in college, there's a lot to it, but if you can find a way to balance that, it's so enjoyable.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that. So you've talked over and over a little bit about the background of your business. Before we started, you obviously have a very scientific mind. I appreciate you keeping it simple for the rest of us. You're in a cutting edge industry already, so it's like you're innovating just because, right? You have to. But is there anything you could share with us that business is changing all the time, the world is changing all the time? So do you have any specific strategies that helps you maintain that adaptability, that innovativeness to it, without sharing any secrets, of course?
No, absolutely. I think, and I mentioned this earlier, innovating on the upside that you can bring to a client, a customer. I mean, it's I think spending time understanding what are the dollar flows, right? Where are the specific pain points? We've done an immense job of customer discovery that it's never stopped. And so really understanding, and then creating solutions, right? Services, products, whatever it is that can be versatile enough so that your product can create upside in many different ways. And so I'll elaborate a little bit on that. But think about it. I mean, as you mentioned, I'm an innovation company. And on one hand, some of my what I would call clients or just partners, whatever you want to call them, are just medical device companies or clinicians where I actually create a product that they use in a clinical setting. Great, standard. Everyone does that. I mean, we're in the medical device industry. However, for example, at the same time, we've partnered with universities in creating projects where they can use our technology for a completely different application that we might have not even considered earlier. And so now we're solving the headache of researchers in an R&D setting that and they're making money. They're writing grants for it. I mean, it works, right? And it's something that's not obvious, right? But our technology, our solution was versatile enough that it could fit that R&D person as much as it could fit a clinical. And then, at the same time, we connected them together. So like the power of connection is so important because now there's it's a huge consortium, right? I mean, partners of different walks that would love to work together and serving as a liaison. There's a lot of value. I've been seeing recently a lot of consulting companies, for example, that are up and coming and growing, creating chains of value that have nothing to do with the consulting that they do, but it's just the sheer amount of networking and the power of connection they can bring to their clients. And so, right, you're more likely to engage with a consultant if you know that they can get you in, for example, that they work with, I don't know, Johnson & Johnson Innovations or something. And you're like, wow, that's cool. And so I think that, like I said, I mean, really spending time understanding where the pain points lie, where the time inefficiencies lie in a system, it's like, for example, I mean, if you could get a company, if you're a consultant and you want to get a company, you know that your companies are taking a long time to get money, because they can't get in front of the right person in the government right enough. I mean, things like that. There's a lot of different ways to create upside, and that's something we were able to do really, really well so far, is being really unique in how we're creating value beyond just the technology.
Excellent. Okay, so you just mentioned, so your customers are figuring out ways to use your technology in ways that you never even imagined. Is what I think I heard you say. And so you're allowing your customer to take you into new places and then you see you have a new opportunity and take advantage of that new opportunity. Summarizing it.
Yeah,
Okay.
but it's also, by the way, just we created a technology that was kind of modular, right? So that
Yeah.
on purpose, so that people could take it to places we never knew we could. So yeah, that's the only thing I'd add.
So create a product that's easily for your customers' needs is what I hear you say. It's probably some standardized components that then can be customized or branched out and used in different ways. Got it.
Platforms,
Yep.
they're huge.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. So again, without sharing anything specific, that would be, IPO or anything like that. Can you offer a glimpse to your future plans for your business? You're only 2 years old. You're only 22 years old. You're only a few months out of college. But what are you thinking over the next 3 to 5 years for the business?
We are going to extremely exciting places. So we built the technology. We have the basic kind of level of the minimum value of product. We've really gotten to build some initial data milestones that we're very happy with how it's looking. So going forward, we're having conversations with very big organizations of international level. I mean, and also just kind of national, like, or industry corporations. And so we actually, going forward, we're looking to partner with giants in the industry and create disruptive value to their workflows. So I think, really, we actually haven't fully decided where the end. I mean, we have a very good idea of where that end strategy is, but we know that depending on how well things go, that could change. So we're keeping an open mind, but we're looking to partner and expand on the basis of data that we have and create more data, understand the product's capabilities beyond what we already know, and I think it's a very exciting. I mean, we have capital right now, and we'll eventually soon enough open up another round, and so we're very excited, very comfortable in the position that we're in right now, and kind of moving forward, very, very kind of calmly but collectively making sure that we can really ensure the best future for the company.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that. And that's a tough question because you don't want to share, obviously, too many secrets or things that are not disclosable in an open format like a podcast, right? So I appreciate you doing that. So one final question for you, Franco. I mean, I know you're only at this for a couple of years, but man, you've probably learned a lot of lessons over the couple of years. So what advice would you offer an aspiring entrepreneur who's thinking about starting a company, maybe even in college?
I got one. The advice, my best piece of advice I give to any entrepreneur of any age, doesn't matter, any field. It is, if you are walking into a room where you're not valued, you're in the wrong room. I can't mention how many times I've walked into a room and kind of my age has been put into question, or even my technology's capabilities, or this and that. And, you don't have to be there, right? I mean, you don't. There are so many dollars in this world. There's so many people in this world, and I mean, you don't have to go with the first one you see. You don't have to marry the first girl you see when it comes to business.
Sure.
So I think it's being deliberate about who you're working with, and making sure that they really respect, appreciate, and value what you're doing. I mean, that's super important. And you can take your time, and it's worth to take the time to make sure you find that, for sure. That's my best piece of advice. I don't know what you think of it.
No, I love it. I love it because you're right. I mean, oftentimes something comes to the table and we think, oh my gosh, if I don't take it, I'm not going to ever get another opportunity, and it may not be the right opportunity. So take your time, be deliberate, think about the right partnerships, think about the right customers you're going to. You mentioned that in your future strategies as well. You're really trying to be deliberate about the growth that you achieve, about the investors you take on, about different things, and that's really, really important, to be deliberate and strategic about how you move your business forward. So that's great advice. So Franco,
Absolutely.
Yeah, Franco, again for joining us today. Great podcast. We really appreciate your perspective. Love the young side of your business as well as yourself. Do not ever let people tell you that you're too young. It sounds like you're good at that already. But it was great meeting you, learning more about your company and your journey. And to everyone watching and listening, we look forward to seeing and hearing you on our next episode. Thank you again, Franco.